The warning came at exactly 3:47 a.m. ship time. Dr. Susan Carter was half asleep at her desk in the research vessel U.S. Starweaver's Communications Center when the first signals arrived. The soft beeping of her console grew louder, pulling her from her drowsy state. She blinked at the screen, rubbing her tired eyes. The signal was unlike anything she had seen before. It pulsed with an odd rhythm, using frequencies that shouldn't have been possible for most known species. "Computer, analyze incoming transmission," she said, reaching for her cold coffee. The computer's response was immediate. "Signal contains multiple language patterns." Converting. Text began flowing across her screen in waves. First in an alien script she didn't recognize, then Galactic Standard, and finally English. As she read the message, her coffee cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. "Warning. Warning. This is the merchant vessel Blue Star. Do not approach. Deadly cargo aboard. Unknown life form. She freezes everything she touches. Crew dead. Repeat. Do not." The message cut off there, but started again in a loop. Susan's hand shook as she pressed the emergency command channel button. "Bridge, this is Dr. Carter. Captain Wright needs to see this immediately." Within 10 minutes, the Starweaver's command center was filled with senior staff. Captain Peter Wright stood with his arms crossed, watching the message repeat on the main screen. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his fingers drummed against his arm, a telltale sign of his concern. "Can we verify the source?" he asked. Susan nodded. "The signal is coming from a ship about 3 hours from our position. It matches the registry of the Blue Star, a private research vessel that went missing 2 weeks ago." "Life signs?" Chief Medical Officer Laura Mills asked, leaning forward to study the readings. "That's the strange part," Susan replied. "We're getting dozens of cold spots throughout the ship, far colder than space itself, and one heat signature, but—" She paused, double-checking her readings. "It's fluctuating between absolute zero and normal living temperature every few seconds." Security Chief Nathan Boyd stepped closer to the display. "Could be a weapon test gone wrong." The Blue Star was rumored to be working on experimental tech. "No weapons we know of can cause instant freezing," Captain Wright said. He turned to face his crew. "Options." Dr. Mills spoke first. "If there are survivors, we're obligated to help. The medical bay can handle severe hypothermia cases." "And if this unknown life form is still active?" Boyd asked. "The message said it kills by touch." The captain was quiet for a long moment. Susan watched him weigh the possibilities. She knew that look. He was running through every scenario, every potential outcome. "We can't ignore a distress signal," he finally said. "But we go in smart. Boyd, assemble a boarding team. Full environmental suits, no exposed skin. Dr. Mills, prep the quarantine bay. Dr. Carter, keep monitoring those signals. If anything changes, I want to know immediately." As the crew dispersed to their duties, Susan turned back to her console. The message kept repeating, but now she noticed something new. Behind the main warning, barely audible, was another sound. It took her several minutes to clean up the audio enough to hear it clearly. It was crying. Soft, musical sobs unlike any human sound, hidden beneath the warning message. Whatever was on that ship wasn't just killing, it was suffering. She thought about reporting this detail but hesitated. The captain had enough to worry about. Besides, in 3 hours they'd find out the truth for themselves. Through the observation window, she could see the stars sliding past as the Starweaver adjusted its course. Somewhere out there, a ship full of frozen corpses was waiting for them, and something that could freeze a person with a single touch was either dead, alive, or something in between. Susan shivered, though the temperature in the room hadn't changed. She had a feeling that in a few hours, their understanding of life itself was going to change forever. She just hoped they would all survive the discovery. The boarding team stood in the airlock of the Blue Star, their breath fogging their helmet visors. Nathan Boyd checked his team's environmental suit seals one last time. The ship's internal temperature was -100 degrees Celsius. Any exposure would mean instant death. "Remember," he said through the radio, "we stay together. No wandering off, no heroics. We find survivors, we mark locations of the dead, and we get out." The 4 members of his team nodded. Their helmet lights cut through the darkness as they moved into the ship's main corridor. Ice covered everything. The walls sparkled with frost crystals, and frozen vapor hung in the air like tiny diamonds. "God help us," whispered Linda Martinez, the team's medical specialist. She knelt beside a frozen body. The man's face was locked in an expression of surprise, one hand still reaching for a door panel. He didn't even have time to scream. Nathan's wrist scanner beeped softly. "The fluctuating heat signature is coming from the medical bay, 2 decks up. Let's move." They found more bodies as they climbed. Engineers frozen at their stations, a cook in the galley, still holding a spatula. A young scientist trapped mid-run, her research tablet shattered at her feet. Each one looked like they had been flash-frozen in an instant. The medical bay doors were sealed shut, covered in a thick layer of ice. It took them 15 minutes with heating tools to cut through. Inside, the temperature dropped even lower, making their suit heaters work overtime. "There," Nathan said, pointing his light toward the center of the room. On the exam table. She lay there like a sleeping angel carved from crystal. Her skin was transparent, with delicate patterns of frost swirling beneath the surface. Long, silvery hair floated around her head as if she was underwater. She wore what looked like a medical gown, but it was made of some strange, flowing material that sparkled like starlight. "Is she dead?" asked Steve Rogers, the team's engineer. Linda moved closer with her medical scanner. "No. Her biology is like nothing I've ever seen. She's somehow existing at temperatures that should be impossible for any living thing." "Look at this," called Amy Foster, examining a nearby computer terminal. The screen was frozen but still working. They were running tests on her, trying to find a way to contain her freezing ability. She wasn't attacking them. They were trying to help her. Nathan stepped closer to the crystalline woman. Despite the intense cold radiating from her body, he felt drawn to her face. She looked peaceful, but there were frozen trails on her cheeks that could only be tears. "Sir." Linda's voice was urgent. "She's waking up." The woman's eyes opened slowly, revealing irises that looked like swirling snowflakes. She blinked, confused, then saw the suited figures surrounding her. Terror filled her face. She tried to speak, but the sound was like tinkling ice crystals. When she moved, the temperature dropped even further. Warning alarms blared in their suits as the heating systems struggled to keep up. "Everyone back," Nathan ordered. "Give her space." But it was too late. The woman reached out in panic, her hand brushing Linda's arm. Even through the environmental suit, the effect was instant. Linda froze solid, her suit and body turning to ice in a heartbeat. "No." The crystalline woman's voice finally formed words they could understand. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please, stay back. I don't want to hurt anyone else." She curled into herself, sobbing those musical tears they had heard in the message. Each tear froze before it could fall, creating a tinkling symphony of ice. Nathan made a decision. "Everyone out. Get back to the Starweaver. Tell them to prep the quarantine bay." "Sir," Steve protested, "we can't leave you." "That's an order. She's terrified and dangerous. Too many people will only make this worse." Nathan kept his voice calm, though his heart was racing. "I'll stay and try to talk to her. Maybe we can convince her to come willingly." As his team reluctantly retreated, carrying Linda's frozen body, Nathan turned back to the crying woman. She was watching him through her crystalline fingers, her eyes full of fear and something else. "Hope. My name is Nathan," he said softly. "And I want to help you." The quarantine bay of the U.S. Starweaver had never been so cold. Ice crept along the edges of the observation window where Dr. Marie Phillips watched the crystalline woman. They had managed to transport her from the Blue Star using a modified stasis field, but keeping her contained was proving difficult. She's affecting the temperature even through the force fields, Marie said, making notes on her tablet. Nothing we have can fully contain her energy signature. Behind the thick barriers, the crystalline woman sat curled up in a corner. She had refused the bed they offered, saying she would just freeze it. Nathan Boyd stood inside the quarantine room, still wearing his environmental suit but with his helmet off. He was the only one who dared stay in the same room with her. "You said your name is Kylara?" Nathan asked gently. She nodded, her silvery hair moving like waves in zero gravity. "In your language, yes, though names are different for my kind." "And what exactly is your kind?" Marie asked through the intercom. Idlara flinched at the sudden voice. Frost spread rapidly across the floor around her. I cannot say. They forbade me from sharing too much. But I never meant to hurt anyone. The freezing. It just happens." Nathan took a careful step closer. "The crew of the Blue Star, they were trying to help you." "Yes." Crystal tears formed in her eyes. "They found me drifting in space. They were kind. The scientists thought they could help me control it. But each test made things worse. More people died. I begged them to put me back in space, but they insisted on trying one more time." Her voice cracked, and the temperature plunged. Warning alarms blared throughout the medical bay. Marie watched in horror as ice began creeping up the walls faster than the ship's systems could melt it. "Kylara," Nathan said firmly. "Look at me. Focus on my voice." The crystalline woman raised her head, meeting his eyes. Slowly, the ice stopped spreading. "That's good," he said. "You can control it somewhat. We just need to figure out how." Marie pressed the intercom again. "Nathan, your suit's power is dropping. The cold is draining it faster than expected. You need to get out of there." "Just a few more minutes," he replied, not taking his eyes off Kylara. "We're making progress." But Kylara shook her head. "No, she's right. You should go. Everyone should stay away from me. I'm too dangerous." She stood up suddenly, backing away from Nathan. Her foot slipped on the ice, and she stumbled forward. Nathan moved without thinking, reaching out to catch her. "No." Kylara screamed as her hand touched his exposed face. Marie slammed her hand on the emergency alarm. Medical teams rushed to the observation window, expecting to see Nathan frozen solid like all of Kylara's other victims. But Nathan wasn't frozen. He stood there, Kylara's crystalline hand pressed against his cheek, and nothing happened. The skin where she touched him was cold, but there was no ice, no instant freezing. Both of them stared at each other in shock. Kylara pulled her hand back slowly, looking at it as if it had transformed. "How?" she whispered. "How are you not frozen?" Nathan touched his cheek where her hand had been. "I don't know." Marie was already running scans, her fingers flying over the computer console. "This is impossible." Her touch is still radiating extreme cold, but something about Nathan's biology is resisting it. Kylara reached out again, hesitantly touching Nathan's hand. Again, nothing happened except a slight chill. Tears flowed down her crystalline face, but for the first time, they weren't tears of sorrow. "In all my existence," she said, her voice full of wonder, "I've never been able to touch anyone without killing them. How is this possible?" Before Nathan could respond, Captain Wright's voice came over the intercom. "Dr. Phillips, Officer Boyd, report to the bridge immediately. We're picking up multiple ships on an intercept course. They're demanding we hand over our frozen passenger, and they're not asking nicely." Nathan looked at Kylara, whose face had filled with fear again. "Don't worry," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "We'll figure this out. I promise." The temperature in the room dropped again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from hope. The science lab buzzed with activity as Dr. Mary Phillips studied the results on her screen for the 5th time. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Next to her, Nathan sat patiently as another blood sample was drawn from his arm. "This is remarkable," Marie said, pointing to the display. "Your blood contains an enzyme we've never seen before. When it comes in contact with Xylura's energy signature, it creates a kind of protective barrier." Nathan rubbed his arm where the needle had been. "So that's why I don't freeze." "Exactly. Your body naturally produces this enzyme. It's like you're carrying your own personal force field against extreme cold." Marie turned to where Xylura stood watching from behind her containment field. "And if we can isolate it, we might be able to help you control your freezing ability." The crystalline woman's eyes lit up with hope, making the frost patterns under her skin swirl faster. "You mean, I might be able to touch others without killing them?" Before Marie could answer, the ship shook violently. Captain Wright's voice came over the intercom. "All hands, battle stations. We have 3 vessels attempting to lock tractor beams on us." Nathan jumped up from his chair. "Who are they?" "2 Zentari warships and a Drachnid science vessel," the captain replied. "They're demanding we surrender the crystalline being. The Zentari want to eliminate her as a threat. The Drachnids want to study her, probably to make weapons." Xylura's face filled with terror. The temperature in the lab dropped sharply, ice crystals forming in the air. "No, please. The Drachnids, they're the ones who—" She stopped suddenly, putting her hands over her mouth. Nathan stepped closer to her containment field. "The ones who what?" She shook her head, crystal tears forming in her eyes. "I can't. I'm not supposed to tell. But they're the reason I'm like this. Please don't let them take me." The ship rocked again. Emergency lights began flashing. "Hull breach on deck 4. Someone shouted over the intercom. They're sending boarding parties." Marie rushed to her computer, frantically copying data. "We need more time. The enzyme analysis isn't complete. Without it, we can't help her." Nathan made a quick decision. He walked to the containment field controls. "What are you doing?" Marie asked, alarmed. "We need to move Xylura somewhere safer." He started shutting down the force fields. "The lab is too exposed." "But the cold." "I'm the only one who can touch her," Nathan said. "So I'm the only one who can protect her." As the force fields came down, Xylura stepped back. "Nathan, no. Even if you're immune, I'll freeze everything around us." The whole ship cooled. He reached out and took her hand. The cold hit him like a wave, but his skin didn't freeze. "We'll figure it out. Right now, we need to move." Xylura stared at their joined hands in wonder. A small smile crossed her crystalline face, making her look like a statue coming to life. Marie handed Nathan a data chip. "All our research is on this. Don't lose it. It might be our only chance to help her." The ship shook again, harder this time. The sounds of fighting echoed from nearby corridors. "Come on," Nathan said to Xylura. "I know some maintenance tunnels they won't think to check. We can." The lab door burst open. 3 figures in heavy armor stormed in, weapons raised. Their suits were marked with Drachnid symbols. "Don't move," one shouted. "The specimen comes with us." Nathan pulled Xylura behind him. "She's not a specimen. She's a person." The lead Drachnid laughed. "Person? She's an experiment. Our experiment. And it's time for her to come home." Xylura's grip on Nathan's hand tightened. The temperature in the room plunged so low that the Drachnid's armor began to crack. "Nathan," she whispered, "I'm scared." He squeezed her hand back. "Don't be. They'll have to freeze me first. And we both know that's not going to happen." The maintenance tunnels of the U.S. Starweaver were narrow and dark. Nathan led Xylura through them carefully, trying to avoid the sounds of fighting above. Every few meters, frost spread from her touch on the walls, but Nathan's grip on her hand never wavered. "They're jamming communications," he said, checking his portable scanner. "We can't contact the bridge." Xylura moved closer to him as distant explosions shook the ship. "The Drachnids won't stop. They spent years trying to create beings like me. I was their first success and their worst failure. What do you mean? Nathan asked, pulling her around a corner as heavy footsteps passed overhead. She touched the wall with her free hand, watching ice crystals form. They wanted to make living weapons. They found a way to merge energy beings with physical matter. I volunteered because they promised to give my people a way to experience physical life. Her voice grew bitter. They didn't tell us the process would trap us between states, unable to fully exist in either form. Another explosion rocked the ship, closer this time. The lights flickered. Warning, the ship's computer announced. Hull breach on Deck 6. Emergency force fields engage. Nathan checked his scanner again. They're pushing us toward the cargo bay, trying to corner us. We should split up, Kaxilera said. I can freeze the corridors behind me, slow them down. You can escape. He turned to face her. In the dim light, her crystalline skin glowed softly. That's not happening. The only reason you're not in Drachnid hands right now is because I can touch you. We stick together. A small smile crossed her face, making patterns of frost swirl beneath her skin. Why do you care so much? I'm dangerous. I've killed people without meaning to. Because you didn't ask for this, Nathan said. And because everyone deserves a chance to. The wall beside them exploded inward. Through the smoke, Centauri soldiers poured in, their weapons charged. From the other direction, Drachnid troops appeared, cutting off their escape. Surrender the specimen, the Centauri commander shouted. Return our property, the Drachnid leader demanded. Nathan pulled Kaxilera behind a fallen piece of wall. Any chance you can freeze them all? She shook her head. Their suits are designed to resist extreme cold. The Drachnids learned from their earlier mistakes. Then we do this the hard way. Nathan drew his weapon. When I create a distraction, run for that access panel. He pointed to a small hatch in the floor. What? No, they'll kill you. Trust me. Before she could argue, Nathan stood up and fired at the ceiling. The shots hit a coolant pipe, sending clouds of steam everywhere. In the chaos, he pushed Kaxilera toward the hatch. But the Drachnids were ready. A stun blast caught Nathan in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. Another hit Kaxilera's leg, making her cry out. Enough games, the Drachnid leader said, stepping forward. The specimen returns with us. The human dies. Kaxilera looked at Nathan, then at their joined hands. Something changed in her eyes. No, she said softly. Then louder. No. The temperature dropped so fast that the air itself seemed to freeze. Ice exploded from her body in all directions. The Centauri troops fired, but their weapons jammed in the intense cold. Impossible, the Drachnid leader shouted as his suit's warning alarms blared. The containment programming is breaking, Kaxilera finished. She stood, pulling Nathan up with her. Frost covered everything except the small space around them. You didn't create me. You trapped me. And I'm done being afraid. The ice spread faster, climbing the walls and freezing everything it touched. The Drachnids tried to retreat, but their suits were already covered in frost. The Centauri turned to run, but found their feet frozen to the floor. Ilera, Nathan said gently, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She squeezed his hand. But this time, I'm choosing to do it, to protect someone I care about. The last thing the attackers saw was a wave of absolute zero rushing toward them, and a crystalline woman standing hand in hand with a human who somehow survived her deadly touch. The bridge of the U.S. Starweaver was silent as Captain Wright stared at the frozen Drachnid and Centauri ships on the main screen. Their vessels hung motionless in space, covered in a thick layer of ice that sparkled in the starlight. Report, he said quietly. 27 enemy troops frozen solid in the lower decks. Susan Carter replied from her station. The others retreated to their ships, but she gestured at the screen. And our crew. 3 injuries, no deaths. The frozen areas are contained. Susan paused. Sir, what she did. I've never seen anything like it. The captain nodded. Where are they now? Medical Bay, Dr. Mary Phillips answered, entering the bridge. Nathan's being treated for the stun blast. XI Laura won't leave his side. She held up her tablet. But you need to see this. The data we collected during the attack. It's incredible. In the medical bay, Nathan sat on an exam bed while XI Laura hovered nearby. Frost formed and melted in endless patterns where she paced. You should rest, Nathan told her. Using your power like that must have taken a lot of energy. She stopped pacing. Energy is what I am. Or was. Or, she made a frustrated sound. I don't even know anymore. Then tell me, Nathan said softly. Tell me what you really are. Tylara looked at him for a long moment. The temperature dropped slightly, but not from fear this time. My people exist as pure energy. We live between stars, travel through space itself. But we were curious about physical life, about touch and taste, and she reached out, gently touching his hand, about love. The Drachnids offered to help, Nathan guessed. They said they could give us physical form. Many of us volunteered. I was the first to survive the process, but she looked down at her crystalline skin. Something went wrong. The energy that makes up my true self became trapped, constantly trying to return to its natural state. That's what causes the freezing. My energy form trying to break free of this physical prison. Nathan squeezed her hand. But you controlled it during the fight. You chose who to freeze. Because of you. She smiled, frost swirling under her skin. Your touch, your enzyme, it doesn't just protect you. It helps stabilize me. Helps me exist in both states at once instead of being torn between them. Before Nathan could respond, Dr. Phillips rushed in, her eyes bright with excitement. I figured it out, she said, holding up her tablet. During the attack, when Tylara used her power, I got readings of her energy signature, combined with what we learned from Nathan's enzyme. She paused, catching her breath. We can help her control it permanently. Sulara's eyes widened. How? Your energy form is trying to escape its physical container, Marie explained. But Nathan's enzyme creates a kind of bridge between states. If we can replicate it, modify it to work with your unique biology, I could exist in both forms at once. Tylara finished. Be physical without losing my energy nature. Exactly. No more accidental freezing. No more being trapped. Marie's excitement faded slightly. But there's a problem. The amount of enzyme needed. It would take years to synthesize enough. Unless you had a direct source, Nathan said quietly. Both women turned to look at him. No, Tylara said immediately. You can't. Taking that much enzyme at once could kill you. Could, Nathan emphasized. But if it works, I won't risk your life, Tylara insisted, not after everything you've done for me. The ship's alert system suddenly blared to life. Captain Wright's voice filled the medical bay. All hands, battle stations. Long-range sensors detect multiple Drachnid warships on approach. They'll be here in less than an hour. Nathan stood up, still holding Tylara's hand. Looks like we don't have years, or even hours. He turned to Dr. Phillips. How fast can you set up the procedure? Nathan, please, Tylara begged. There has to be another way. He touched her crystalline cheek gently. You risked everything to protect me. Let me do the same for you. Outside the ship, stars twinkled coldly as the Drachnid fleet approached. Time was running out, and the only solution might cost a human his life to save a being made of living ice. Dr. Mary Phillips worked quickly, her hand steady despite the pressure. The medical bay had been converted into a makeshift laboratory, equipment humming all around them. On one bed lay Nathan, tubes running from his arms to a complex filtering system. On another bed lay Tylara, her crystalline form glowing softly in the dim light. Drachnid fleet, 15 minutes out, Susan Carter's voice announced over the intercom. The enzyme extraction is at 70%, Marie said, checking her readings. Nathan's vital signs are dropping, but still stable. Tylara hadn't taken her eyes off Nathan since the procedure began. Frost formed and melted around her in waves of anxiety. His heart rate is too low, she said softly. I'm fine, Nathan insisted, though his voice was weak. Just cold. That's the enzyme loss, Marie explained. Your body's natural resistance to extreme temperatures is being drained. The ship shuddered as the first long-range shots from the Drachnid fleet hit their shields. 10 minutes, Susan updated. Shields at 80%. Mary pressed buttons on her console, increasing the extraction rate. We're running out of time. Nathan's body can't take much more of this. Then stop, HFY said, trying to sit up. I won't let him die for me. Nathan reached out with a shaking hand. My choice, remember. Before HFY could respond, a massive explosion rocked the ship. Warning alarms blared throughout the medical bay. Direct hit, Captain Wright's voice was tense. They're targeting our engines. We can't take many more like that. Marie checked her readings again. Enzyme extraction at 90%. Just a few more minutes. Nathan's vital signs suddenly dropped sharply. His hands, still reaching for HFY, began to tremble. His core temperature is falling too fast, Marie said, rushing to adjust the equipment. The enzyme loss is affecting his basic functions. We have to stop or heal. No, Nathan whispered. Finish it. HFY made a sound like breaking ice. She pulled the tubes from her arms and stood up. What are you doing? Marie asked in alarm. Saving him. HFY moved to Nathan's bed, placing her hands on either side of his face. I finally understand. The enzyme doesn't just protect him from cold. It helps bridge the gap between energy and matter, between what I am and what I want to be. The temperature in the room plunged. But this time, the cold felt different. It wasn't the destructive force that had frozen so many others. It was more like the gentle cold of the first snow or the refreshing chill of a spring morning. Nathan managed to say, What are you? Choosing, she answered. Like you did. Light began to pour from her crystalline form. The patterns under her skin swirled faster and faster. Where her hands touched Nathan's face, a soft glow spread through his body. Incredible, Mary breathed, staring at her readings. The enzyme in his blood, it's reacting with her energy signature. They're stabilizing each other. Another explosion rocked the ship, but in the medical bay, time seemed to stand still. HFY's physical form began to shift, becoming something between solid and energy. The cold and light mixed together, surrounding both her and Nathan in a swirling aurora of blues and silvers. Nathan's vital signs started to climb. Color returned to his face as his temperature stabilized. At the same time, HFY's crystalline appearance softened, becoming more flesh-like while still maintaining an ethereal glow. When the light faded, they were both changed. Nathan sat up, his strength returned, while HFY stood beside him, her form now a perfect balance between physical and energy. How? Marie asked in wonder. HFY smiled, touching Nathan's cheek without a trace of frost. His humanity showed me how to be more than what I was made to be. And in return, she took his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. I showed him how to bridge the gap between two worlds. Drachnid fleet in firing range. Susan's voice called. Nathan stood up, steady on his feet. Then let's show them what happens when humanity and energy work together. HFY's eyes glowed with newfound purpose. Together, she agreed. As the Drachnid ships approached, they had no way of knowing that their weapon experiment had failed in the most beautiful way possible, by finding love instead of destruction, and proving that even the coldest heart could be warmed by human determination.